Nobody ever looked twice at Daniel Reed. That was fine by him. He was the kind of man who fit into the background of things. Medium height, worn jacket, boots that had been resold twice because new ones cost money he didn't have. He worked the night shift at Vorda's Starport Freight Depot, checking cargo seals and logging container weights for 12 hours at a stretch. He did his job. He walked home. He slept. He did it again. Vorda was not a good planet. It was a wet planet, a gray planet, a planet that always smelled faintly of engine oil and old rain. Humans had been here for 40 years, brought in as labor when the Conclave needed hands for the Outer Rim expansion. They were still here because leaving cost money nobody had saved. The Conclave technically included humans in its census records. That was about as far as the generosity went. Daniel had stopped being angry about any of it a long time ago. Anger took energy, and energy was something he rationed. He was 3 blocks from home when he heard it. It came from between 2 stacked cargo containers in the narrow alley behind the port market. A sound like something small and wet trying very hard not to make any sound at all, and failing. A thin, broken scratching. Then silence. Then the scratching again. Daniel stopped walking. He stood in the rain for a full 10 seconds, telling himself it was not his problem. There were 100 things in the alleys of Vorda's lower districts that made noises at night. Most of them were not worth investigating. He was tired. His left shoulder ached from hauling a jammed loading arm back into its housing for the 3rd time this week. He went into the alley anyway. The containers were stacked 4 high and left a gap at the base just wide enough for a man to squeeze into sideways. He clicked on the small work light clipped to his jacket and pointed it into the dark. The first thing he saw were the eyes. They were amber, deep, warm amber, the color of something old and valuable, and they were staring at him from inside the wreckage of a collapsed shipping crate. The second thing he saw was the rest of her. She was small, easily mistaken for a large cat in poor light, except for the wings folded tight against her back, the faint shimmer of dark scales, and the 4 clawed feet that were gripping the edge of the broken crate with the desperate grip of something that had been holding on for a very long time. Daniel knew what she was. Everyone on Vorda knew what dragons looked like. You saw them occasionally, passing through the starport in diplomatic convoys, always surrounded by attendants and conclave officials. You did not see them in collapsed crates in rain-soaked alleys, alone, with a wing sitting at a wrong angle and ribs showing clearly beneath their scales. She flinched when the light hit her. A low hiss came out, not threatening, just frightened. The sound a creature makes when it has nothing left but noise. Daniel crouched down to her level. He thought about the conclave regulations on unauthorized contact with protected species. He thought about the forms that would need to be filed. He thought about how filing them would require a legal database subscription that cost more than he made in a month. He thought about how she was shaking. He unzipped his work jacket slowly, watching her eyes the whole time to make sure she wasn't going to bolt. She didn't move. She was watching him the way something watches when it has made peace with whatever comes next. "All right," he said quietly, to nobody in particular. "All right." He draped the jacket over her carefully. She snapped at his hand, once, fast, and caught nothing. Then she went still. He worked his arms under the jacket, feeling her tense, and then, after a long moment, stopped tensing. She weighed almost nothing. That was the worst part. A creature this size should have had some weight to her. He carried her home. It took him 6 minutes. He walked quickly and kept to the side streets. She made no sound the whole way, just lay wrapped inside his jacket with her head pressed against his collarbone and her amber eyes open, watching the rain hit the street. His apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had not been inspected for structural integrity in 11 years. The lift worked sometimes. Tonight it did not. He climbed the stairs with her held against his chest and unlocked the door with his elbow. He set her on the kitchen table, the only flat surface not covered in mechanical diagrams and repair manuals, and stepped back. She lay still for a moment. Then she slowly lifted her head and looked around the room. Then she looked at him. "I don't know what you eat," he told her, "but I'll figure it out." He opened the fridge. There was not much there. Half a block of protein paste, some dried grain strips, and 3 containers of something that had been a meal at some point. He looked back at her. She was still watching him. Her tongue, thin, dark, slightly forked, flickered out once and then retreated. Protein, he decided. Probably protein. He started looking. Outside, the rain kept falling on Vorda. Nobody was looking for anything in the alleys tonight. Nobody was looking for her. Daniel Reed, who nobody ever looked at twice, stood in his small kitchen and tried to figure out how to feed a dragon. It was the most useful he had felt in years. She ate 6 full protein packs before she stopped. Daniel sat across the table and watched her work through them, methodical, determined, not lifting her head between bites. When the 6th one was gone, she sat back, licked her front claws clean with a short, precise tongue, and then looked at him as if he had done something worth acknowledging. "More?" he asked. She looked at the empty packs, then at him. Then she tucked her head under her good wing and closed her eyes. "Right," he said. "Sleep first." He left her on the table and went to find something useful in his repair kit. The wing was the problem he couldn't ignore. The left one sat at a slight downward angle, not broken clean through, more like a stress fracture, the kind that healed wrong if left alone. Daniel had no medical training for dragon anatomy. He had, however, repaired a significant number of things that were not supposed to be reparable, using materials that were not designed for the job. He approached this the same way. He found heat-wrap bandaging from a thermal seal kit. He found 2 thin strips of rigid backing from a broken data board. He found medical adhesive he'd been using to patch his boots and decided it could do more important work tonight. She woke up when he came near the wing. Her head came up fast, and she went rigid. "I know," he said. "I know, but it's sitting wrong. You want to fly again or not?" She held very still. He took that as permission and worked slowly, talking the whole time, not saying anything important, just narrating what his hands were doing so she could follow it. Warm the backing. Check the angle. Wrap from the joint outward. Not too tight. He'd done something similar for a friend's broken wrist once, years ago, when the colony's medical station had a 6-hour wait and his friend couldn't afford priority. She didn't snap at him again. She watched him with those amber eyes the whole time, and by the time he was done she had leaned, very slightly, into his hand. He sat back and looked at the finished splint. It was not pretty, but it was straight, and it would hold. "Nova," he said suddenly, not knowing where the word came from. He didn't even know if it was a name in any language she understood. But she flicked her ear toward him, a small, triangular ear he hadn't noticed before, pressed flat under her skull ridge, and looked at him directly. He decided that was close enough. Over the next 3 days, Nova reorganized his apartment the way someone reorganizes a room they have decided belongs to them now. The first morning, she moved herself from the table to the top of his tool shelf, which gave her a view of the entire room. The second morning, she moved to the back of the couch, where she could see both the door and the window. By the third morning, she was on his pillow, and Daniel had half a pillow, and that was simply how things were. She followed him. That was the part he hadn't expected. Every time he moved room to room, not that there were many rooms, she tracked him. Not nervously, like a frightened animal checking on a threat. More like someone keeping an eye on a situation they had decided to take responsibility for. When he worked at his desk, she sat on the corner of it. When he ate, she sat across from him and watched until he gave her a portion. When he slept, she was somewhere in the radius of the bed, always within arm's reach. She was intelligent in ways he kept catching off guard. She understood patterns very quickly. After the second day, she knew which cabinet the protein packs were in and would look at it pointedly when hungry instead of making any sound. She figured out how the window latch worked on the 4th day. He saw her testing it, methodical, patient, and then left it alone once she understood it, as if the knowledge itself was the prize. On the 4th evening, his neighbor knocked. Grasso was a Velen, short, wide, for arms, with the permanently worried expression of a species that had evolved in a predator-heavy environment and never quite forgot it. He had lived next door for 3 years. He was not a bad neighbor. He was, however, deeply committed to following rules. "I saw it through the window," he said, when Daniel opened the door. His forearms were doing the Velen equivalent of wringing hands. "Daniel, I saw what you have in there." She needed help, Daniel said. "It is a dragon, a conclave-protected species. You are a human on a labor-class residency permit. Do you understand how many violations? How long do you need?" Daniel asked. Grasso stopped. "What? Before you report it. How long can you give me? She's still healing. I need to get her stable first." Grasso stared at him for a long time. His eyes, all 4 of them, blinked at different intervals. 72 hours, he said finally, in the tone of someone who was going to feel bad about this for a while. 72 hours, and then I have no choice. That's fair, Daniel said. Thank you. He closed the door. Nova was sitting on the back of the couch, watching the door. When he turned around, she made a low sound, short, almost conversational, and then went back to cleaning her good wing. We've got 3 days, Daniel told her. She didn't look up. She already knew. He was fairly sure she had understood every word. He sat down on the couch beside her. After a moment, she stepped off the back, walked across his lap, turned twice, and settled. The purring started, that low, subsonic thing he felt in his ribs more than heard. 3 days was not much. But it was something, and Daniel had always known how to work with something. The ship appeared in Vorta's orbit on the second day. Daniel saw the alert on the colony feed. A Dravosi diplomatic vessel, registered to the Conclave's Lineage and Welfare Division. These were not ships that visited freight colonies. These were ships that visited places where something important had happened. He looked at Nova, who was sitting on his windowsill watching birds in the neighboring building's roof garden. Someone noticed, he said. She flicked her tail once. She already knew. He was still not used to that. The officers arrived at his door the next morning, 3 of them in Conclave auxiliary uniforms, accompanied by the man they were clearly there to clear the way for. Senior diplomat Oren was old, even by Dravosi standards, which meant he was very old indeed. He was tall, thin, and moved the way people move when they have not been questioned about anything in many years. His robe was deep gray with a gold rank line at the collar. He looked at Daniel's apartment door the way someone looks at something they expected to be unpleasant and are not disappointed. You are Daniel Reed, Oren said. Not a question. I am, Daniel said. You have an unlicensed juvenile dragon on unlicensed premises. Under Conclave Welfare Code 7, Sub-Article 19, she is a ward of the Conclave until lineage and status can be confirmed. You will surrender her now, and we will not escalate the matter of your violations. Daniel stepped aside and gestured into the apartment. She's on the couch. Nova was, in fact, on the couch. She had heard all of it. As Oren and his escorts entered, she stood up, small, dark-scaled, with the makeshift splint still on her left wing, and looked at them with the flat amber stare of someone who had made up their mind. The lead escort reached out a hand. Nova's hiss was not loud. It was not even particularly dramatic. It was the kind of sound that communicates, with absolute clarity, that the next hand that comes close is going to learn something painful. All 3 escorts stopped moving. Oren's expression didn't change, which meant he was working hard to keep it that way. Nova, Daniel said quietly. It's okay. She looked at him, then at Oren. Then she walked across the couch, jumped to the floor, crossed the room, and sat directly on Daniel's foot. She was pressed against his leg with the attitude of someone establishing a claim. The room was very quiet for a moment. A 4th person stepped forward from behind the escorts. Younger, with data tools clipped to her belt, and the slightly apologetic look of someone who has to be the one to say the inconvenient thing. Riva, her badge read. Xenobiological assessment. She was watching Nova with careful eyes. Diplomat Oren, she said, in a very professional tone. I'm seeing bonding posture. The lateral contact, the position relative to the human, the vocalization pattern toward the approach. That is not possible, Oren said. I have her behavioral log from 3 days of proximity. I'd like your permission to complete a formal assessment before we attempt retrieval. The word attempt hung in the air. Everyone in the room understood what it meant. You did not remove a bonded dragon by force. You did not do that for welfare reasons, for legal reasons, and also for the simple practical reason that a bonded dragon who did not wish to be moved was a serious physical inconvenience, even at juvenile size. Oren looked at Nova. He looked at Daniel. His jaw was tight. This, he said, is not how this works. I understand, Daniel said. A human cannot bond with a dragon. It does not happen. I didn't do anything on purpose, Daniel said. I found her in an alley. She was hypothermic and her wing was fractured. I took her home and fed her. And now you're claiming. I'm not claiming anything, Daniel said. He was not angry. He was not defensive. He sounded, if anything, slightly tired, which was his natural state after a long week. I'm telling you what happened. What that means is your field, not mine. I'm a freight mechanic. Oren stared at him for a long time. Oren was very good at staring at people until they said something stupid. He had been doing it for decades, and it worked reliably. It had worked on 3 planetary governors, a shipping consortium chair, and any number of human labor representatives. Daniel waited him out with the patience of someone who had once spent 4 hours coaxing a seized engine coupling to release by hand and understood that some things simply took as long as they took. Riva was quietly scanning Nova with a small device, trying to make herself invisible. Nova watched her with mild interest and did not move from Daniel's foot. "I'll need 48 hours to complete the assessment properly," Riva said. "The results will determine the legal path forward." "This is a delay tactic," Oren said. "No," Riva said. "It's protocol. Sub-Article 4, same code. Dragon welfare supersedes retrieval urgency when bonding indicators are present." She paused. "I have to follow the code, diplomat." Another silence. Nova made a small sound, low, satisfied, and lay down with her chin on Daniel's boot. Oren turned and left without another word. His escorts followed. Riva looked at Daniel with an expression that was not quite an apology and not quite relief. "She's in good condition," she said quietly, looking at the wing splint. "Better than I expected." "I did what I could," Daniel said. Riva nodded slowly. She looked at the splint again, at the careful alignment of it, and then at Daniel's hands, which were the hands of someone who fixed things for a living. "Yes," she said. "You did." She left. Daniel closed the door. Nova stood up, stretched with her wings half spread, the splinted one not fully extending, but trying, and then looked at him with those amber eyes. 48 hours, he told her. She walked back to the couch, turned twice, and lay down. She wasn't worried. Daniel decided, looking at her, that this was either very reassuring or deeply alarming. He put the kettle on. The summons came on the second day, printed on formal conclave paper because the Dravosi still used paper for things that mattered. Daniel was required to attend a formal review hearing aboard the diplomatic vessel in orbit. Transport would be provided. He should prepare a statement. He owned 2 sets of clothes that were not work uniforms. He put on the cleaner one. Nova did not want him to leave. She made this clear by sitting on his boot again. Then, when he carefully lifted his foot and placed her aside, sitting on his boot again. He repeated this 4 times before she apparently concluded that this tactic had a low success rate and switched to sitting in front of the door. He stepped over her. She followed him to the landing area where the shuttle waited. He had to walk on board without looking back, because looking back would not have helped anything. The conclave vessel was large, well lit, and designed to make everyone aboard feel slightly smaller than they actually were. The hearing chamber had high ceilings, a curved panel of seats for representatives, and a single flat floor-level standing area where Daniel was told to wait. He stood there with his hands in his pockets. For 50 minutes, they discussed him without speaking to him. They discussed precedent, legal codes, what a bond confirmation might mean for conclave policy, what it would mean for human residency classification, how it would look if it were allowed, and how it would look if it were not. They debated the wording of subarticles. They referenced a case from 80 years ago involving a Mervain child and a conclave ward animal, which Daniel grasped was meant to be analogous, though he wasn't sure it was. He stood and listened and waited. When the chair of the panel finally turned to him, the question was simple. "Do you have anything to say?" "Yes," Daniel said. He didn't have a prepared speech. He'd thought about writing one and decided against it. He just said what happened, in order, without decorating it. He found her on a Tuesday night. The temperature was 4 degrees. She was in a collapsed crate in the alley behind the port market. Her wing was fractured and her body weight was significantly below what it should have been for her apparent age. He took her home because she would have been dead by morning. He fed her, splinted the wing, and kept her warm. He did not contact the conclave databases because he did not have access to them. He used what knowledge he had, which came from years of fixing machinery and one winter years ago when he'd helped a colony medic who was short-handed during an outbreak. He did not try to keep her from the conclave. He reported nothing because reporting would have required legal access he didn't have and would have resulted in his arrest before anyone looked at Nova. He asked his neighbor for 72 hours. He used the time to get her stable. He stopped talking. "You understand," Oren said, "that what you're describing is still a series of violations of conclave code." "I understand," Daniel said. "What would you have had me do?" Oren opened his mouth, then closed it. "Walk past her," Daniel said, not provocatively, just naming the option. That was the choice. Walk past or don't. I didn't. Riva set her data tablet on the panel's shared display without standing up. Assessment complete, she said. Full bonding indicators confirmed. Nova shows primary attachment behaviors consistent with a first bond event. Attempting forced separation at this developmental stage carries a 63% probability of causing lasting psychological damage. Under Code 7, Article 2, that outcome is categorically prohibited. Nobody at the panel looked happy. There is also, Riva continued, in the same careful tone, a lineage match. The room went very quiet. I ran her scale signature against the Conclave Dragon Registry as part of standard procedure. She is registered. Her family reported her lost during a transport incident on the Vorta-Essen freight corridor, approximately 6 months ago. The panel chair leaned forward. She has living family? A mother. Registered senior bonded. Conclave record number D4471. Name, Sarah. Riva paused. I have already sent her a preliminary notification per code requirement. She responded within 4 minutes. What did she say? The chair asked. She said she is coming. Riva looked at her tablet, and she asked for the name of the human who found her daughter. The panel did not speak for a long moment. Daniel stood in the flat space on the floor and said nothing. He had nothing to add. He had said what happened. That was all he had. Oren was looking at him with an expression Daniel couldn't fully read. It wasn't respect exactly. It wasn't contempt anymore, either. It was something in between. The look of a person who had spent decades knowing exactly how a category of people behaved and was now adjusting for new information. You'll be returned to the colony, the chair said finally. You are not to leave Vorta pending further review. Do you understand? Yes, Daniel said. The dragon will remain in your care for the time being. The chair said it like it tasted strange. Given the assessment findings. All right, Daniel said. That was it. They were done with him. He walked back to the shuttle, rode it down through the cloud layer, and stepped out into the cold Vorta air. He was back in his apartment within the hour. Nova hit him in the chest approximately 2 seconds after he opened the door, a full-speed, full-body collision that knocked him back a step. She made sounds he had never heard from her before, rapid and layered, while she climbed him like a ladder and settled on his shoulders with her tail wrapped twice around his neck and her chin pressed hard against the top of his head. I was gone 4 hours, he told her. She said something emphatic. 4 hours, he repeated. She said it again. He stood very still for a moment. Then he reached up and put one hand on her side, where her heart was beating fast and strong under the scales. I know, he said more quietly. I know. Somewhere above the clouds, a message was traveling at relay speed to a place where a dragon named Sarah was already moving before she finished reading it. She was coming. Daniel didn't know yet what that meant, but he had a feeling the next chapter of his very small, very quiet life was about to get considerably louder. Sarah did not land quietly. She couldn't. There was no quiet way for something her size to land anywhere in Vorta's lower districts. The Conclave had apparently suggested the starport's main cargo bay. She had apparently declined, because she sat down in the colony's central square instead, a broad open space used for market days and the occasional public assembly, and the sound of her arrival cleared the entire block in both directions before she had fully settled her wings. Daniel heard it from his apartment. Everyone heard it from their apartments. He walked to the square. She was the length of a mid-sized transit shuttle, dark in color, with scales that caught light differently depending on angle, deep brown in shadow, something closer to copper in direct light. Her head was broad and her eyes were the same amber as Nova's but older, with the particular quality of eyes that had seen a great many things and weighed most of them carefully. She was already still by the time Daniel arrived. Completely still, the way very large creatures sometimes are. Not resting, just choosing not to move. The square had about 60 people in it, standing at a variety of distances that mapped fairly accurately to individual courage. Nobody had left. Daniel noted this. Vorta's lower district humans had made a collective decision to stay and look at the enormous dragon in their square, which said something about them. Sarah's gaze moved through the crowd until it found him. He was not sure how she knew, but she did. He walked toward her until he was close enough that she had to angle her head slightly downward. Daniel Reed, she said. Her voice was deep and clear and carried easily over the square. Yes, he said. I want to see where she was kept. not how she was kept, or if she was kept well. Where? The choice of words stayed with him. His apartment was on the 4th floor. Sarah positioned herself outside the window. Her head and the first portion of her long neck were sufficient, and looked in. Nova, who had been balanced on Daniel's shoulder for the walkover, saw her mother and went entirely rigid for about 2 seconds, then launched herself off Daniel's shoulder and through the open window, hitting Sarah somewhere around the jaw and making a sound that was loud, sustained, and completely unlike any sound she had made in the apartment before. It was a sound that had been waiting 6 months to come out. Sarah closed her eyes. One great foreleg came up to press gently against Nova. They stayed that way for a long moment. Daniel stood in his apartment and did not say anything. He looked at the kitchen counter, the protein pack wrappers he had not thrown away yet, the heat wrap materials still coiled near the sink, the 2 small rigid backing strips from the data board he had used for the wing splint. He didn't know why he hadn't thrown them away. He did now. When Sarah opened her eyes, she looked through the window at the apartment again. At all of it. Her gaze moved like an assessment, slow and thorough. "Tell me what you found," she said. He told her, the same way he had told the panel, in order, without embellishment. Sarah listened without interrupting once. Nova sat tucked against her mother's jaw and listened too, though she had been present for all of it and presumably knew. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for a time. "In my people's tradition," she said, "saving a child creates a recognition, not a debt. Debt can be paid, and then it is gone. Recognition remains." She paused. "I recognize you, Daniel Reed. That is not a small thing." "You don't have to," he started. "I am not doing it because I have to." He stopped. Nova made a soft sound from her position against Sarah's jaw. Agreeing, probably. Outside, the crowd in the square had not dispersed. They had, if anything, grown. Word traveled fast in the lower districts. People were watching from windows, from the edges of the square, from the rooftop of the market building 2 blocks over. A human man standing at his window, talking to a dragon mother the size of a transit shuttle, while a baby dragon sat on the dragon's head like she owned the place. Daniel noticed none of it. He was watching Sarah. "She needs to come home with me," Sarah said. "She is still young. She needs her kind. Her world." "I know," Daniel said. "This does not make you glad." "It makes me glad for her. Those aren't the same thing." He said it simply, not asking for anything, just naming the truth of it. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then Nova's tantrum began. It started as a low sound and built quickly into something that was neither a hiss nor a roar, but something with properties of both, accompanied by her wings snapping open as wide as they could go, the splinted one slightly behind the other, and her claws leaving visible marks in the scales of Sarah's jaw as she gripped and refused to stop gripping. She was not violent. She was not attacking anyone. She was making absolutely certain that every creature within a significant radius understood her position on the matter of leaving. It went on for nearly 2 minutes. Sarah bore it with the patience of someone who had raised children before. Daniel stood at the window and watched. He did not try to calm her down. He thought she was entitled to her feelings, and she could have them. When Nova finally ran out of energy and sat heaving with her wings half spread and her eyes bright and furious, Sarah looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel. "I see," Sarah said quietly. Something in her voice had shifted. Not softened exactly. More like it had reorganized itself around a new fact. "I will need a few days," she said. "There are arrangements to be made." "All right," Daniel said. Nova fixed him with a look that said she had not forgotten this was partially his fault. He accepted that. Below in the square, 60 people who had watched all of it were very quiet. Not the quiet of fear. The quiet of people who had just seen something they would not forget. A human, a dragon, a window between them, and something real on both sides of it. One of the market vendors, an old woman named Berta who had been on Vorta for 31 years and was not impressed by most things anymore, turned to her neighbor and said, "Huh." Her neighbor nodded. That was about right. Nova left on a Thursday. She did not go easily. She went the way someone goes when they know it is right and correct, and they have decided to be furious about it anyway. She allowed Sarah to carry her. She kept her eyes on Daniel the entire time the ship prepared to lift. Visible through the starport's observation window, a small dark shape pressed against the viewport of the diplomatic vessel, amber eyes fixed on the ground below. Daniel watched the ship until it was gone. Then he went home. The apartment was very quiet. He had known it would be quiet. He had lived alone here for 4 years before Nova, and it had been quiet the whole time. The quiet now was a different shape. He threw away the protein pack wrappers. He coiled the heat-wrap bandaging and put it away. He did not throw away the 2 strips of rigid backing from the data board. He put them on the shelf above his desk without thinking much about it. He went back to work on Friday. 12 hours, loading dock, same jammed arm that always jammed. He fixed it. He went home. On Monday, he received a message from Riva. The Conclave review, she wrote, had produced some unusual results. Sarah had formally petitioned the Conclave's Welfare Oversight Board, not on behalf of humans, not as a political argument, but specifically under Dragon Welfare Code. Her position was precise. The individual responsible for her daughter's survival had lacked access to the medical databases that would have helped him provide faster care. He had risked legal consequences for providing any care at all. He had done this on wages that left him without margin for emergencies. The system that structured his life that way had, directly, put her child at additional risk. This was a Dragon welfare failure. She was formally registering it as one. The Conclave, Riva wrote, did not love this argument. But it was a Dragon making it, and the code was clear, and Orin could not find a procedural reason to dismiss it, though he had looked very hard. There would be changes. They would be slow. They would require more hearings and more filings and more of the very tedious machinery of bureaucratic adjustment. But they were coming. In the meantime, Riva wrote, there was a new role available. Conclave sanctioned, Vorta District, First Response Xenobiological Liaison. The job category had been created recently. The role was specifically for someone with practical hands-on experience in emergency care for non-human species and no formal credentials that would require years of retraining. The pay was not generous, but it was significantly better than Freight Depot night shift. It came with full database access. There was a line at the bottom. This was not created for you specifically, Daniel. But you are the only person on this planet who currently qualifies for it. He read the message twice. Then he replied, I'll take it. He started the following week. The work was not glamorous. It turned out the colony had a quiet and ongoing need for someone who could be called at odd hours when an injured or distressed non-human creature was found somewhere it should not have been. Vorta's lower districts, it emerged, were full of things that needed help. He handled a juvenile mare vein with a fractured limb, a Keth nesting pair displaced by a collapsed building, something he could not identify at all that had clearly been in a container for too long. He learned as he went, the way he always learned, by paying attention and being practical. He got database access. He used it every day. 3 weeks after Nova left, she came through his window at 6 in the morning. Not the door. The window, which was 4 floors up. He was awake because he was always awake early now. Sleep had become a lighter thing in the quiet apartment, and he heard the sound of something landing on the outer ledge and turned in time to see her work the latch open with the precision of someone who had memorized the mechanism and been thinking about it for 3 weeks. She was slightly larger. 3 weeks had done something noticeable. The wing splint was gone. She had been properly treated, and the fracture had healed clean. She looked healthy in a way she hadn't looked when he found her, filled out, bright-eyed, scales with a better sheen. She jumped off the windowsill and hit him in the chest. He caught her. She was heavier than before. He staggered back a step. She made the rapid layered sound she always made when she'd been away too long, which had been one day the first time she made it, and was now 3 weeks, and she apparently felt the scale was similar. Hello, he said. She told him a great deal. He held her and let her, and scratched the side of her jaw where she liked it, and listened to all of it. Sarah had arranged the visits officially. Part of Nova's education in interspecies relations, which was a real category of dragon development and not something anyone could argue against without arguing against dragon education, which nobody was prepared to do. It would continue as long as it continued. That was as formal as the arrangement was, and it was enough. Later, with Nova asleep on his feet because the pillow was not big enough anymore, Daniel sat at his desk and worked through a xenobiology database on Keth physiology because he had another call scheduled for the afternoon. The apartment was warm. The rain tapped at the window. Somewhere in the colony below, 60 people who had watched a dragon land in their square were having conversations that had not been possible before. Small ones, careful ones, the kind that eventually moved things. Daniel was not aware of being a cause of any of it. He was aware that his feet were warm, that the database was genuinely useful, and that in 3 weeks Nova had learned to work the window latch. He was going to have to think about that. A dragonling who could let herself in was a different kind of problem than a dragonling who couldn't. A good problem, though. He turned the page and kept reading. He had not set out to change anything. He had walked home on a wet Tuesday night and not walked past a crate in an alley. That was all. Humans, it turned out, were like that. They found the thing in the rain. They took it home. They figured it out. And then, sometimes, everything was different.